What's going on? Today I'm going to be doing the escape machine on hackthebox. The reason I'm choosing this machine today, it's because there's actually some pretty good general Windows hacking principles here, but there's also some definitely useful Active Directory hacking methods here, for example, involving a little bit of a spoiler, but it involves NTLM hashes and using them for authentication as well as potentially cracking hashes as well. So without further ado, we can get started, actually. I already got the IP up here. First things first, let's run our nmap scan. These flags are totally fine. All right, now that our nmap scan is finished, let's see. Okay, so we see that these are immediately indications that the machine is likely a domain controller, actually. We can see it's got Kerberos on port 88, so that's definitely an indicator of that. We see port 135 for RPC. That's going to be useful to us later on if we have credentials. 139 and 445. These are associated with SMB protocol, which we can be testing later on for anonymous access. And we also see that there is MS SQL instance on this machine. It's got Microsoft SQL Server 2019. This is also definitely useful to us. We might be able to authenticate to this and gain a shell through this service if we have credentials. And we have some general information about the domain here as well. It is a domain controller. We see here DC and dc.sql.htb. The rest of these ports are pretty standard. I don't think that there's anything else here that we should be testing. So starting off here, the first thing that we could be testing is for anonymous access on SMB, as well as potentially guest access on the MS SQL service as well. But first, let's see if we can get some information on what's running on SMB. So we can go here. And before we're trying to authenticate to the service anonymously, it's good to just try listing to see if we can enumerate any files on there to begin with. So we left the password empty, and we can see straight away that we're able to get some shares. So these are all standard, except for public. This is a non-standard share. So let's see if we can access this. Okay, fantastic. Let's try to get this file. There's nothing more here, so we can exit out easily. So we have a PDF here. There's several things that we can test, but let's start off with just trying to open the file. So it seems to be some sort of procedure for accessing the SQL server for some company. Yeah, there's some story here behind it. Interesting. Fantastic. Okay, so here we finally have some credentials. We've got a user, public user, as well as a password guest users can't write 1. So that's probably an indicator that the guest user does not have write access, but just because we don't have write access does not mean that we shouldn't pursue this further. So now that we have some credentials for what seem to be the SQL service, let's try to authenticate and see if we can get some information on the database as well. So we've got the credentials. We can close out the PDF here, go back to our terminal, and using Mpacket, we can authenticate to MS SQL client as well. So let's see. We got the password here. And fantastic. So we now have a shell on the MS SQL service. And let's see what we can do. One easy way to gain a session is to use XP command shell, but since we're a guest user, this is likely disabled, but we can always try this. So let's see if it allows us to do it, but I doubt it. Okay, so we don't have permissions for this. If we did have permissions, this would allow us to easily execute commands on the server and just gain a remote shell using a reverse shell using a netcat as a listener from our machine. Likely it would have put us in either the SQL service account or perhaps a guest account context. But again, we still have some options here to continue enumeration. For example, we could use this command xp_directory to connect back to a responder instance on our Kali machine. And this would actually allow us to capture the NTLM hash of the account that's running this SQL. So we are on the same network, so I believe that we should be able to connect directly back to ourselves pretty easily here. So let's open a new terminal and start up responder. Our interface is missing. We just need to specify a ton 0, for example, because that's the one that our VPN is running under. So this is already listening. Let's see if we can connect back to ourselves here. I think it's XP. Let's see. Let's check our notes. All right. We're going to need to put our Kali IP address here. And this is just example. We actually don't need to have anything open on this share. And let's try to connect. So I think here it should obviously have nothing available to us because the share does not exist. But let's see if our responder captured that request. Oh, skipping previously captured hash for SQL SQL SVC. So that's funny, I guess, because I've already done this machine before. It's not giving us the account, the hash, but here it will actually print the hash out for you if this is the first time that you're doing the machine. Because I've already got the hash here in my notes, I think I'm just gonna copy paste that here. This is what the output would look like of responder once you get the hash. So let's say it's the NTLM v2 hash. So now that we have this, you can just copy this, close off responder, empty our terminal because we don't need it anymore now that we've captured the hash. We can go create a txt file with the hash, save it. We can leave this open as a matter of fact and try to crack it with hashcat. And we're going to use Rocky as our word list. User share word list. Slovakia. Hopefully it automatically detects the hash type, and it did. Even if we're not able to crack this hash, actually we can still use it. Oh, it was able to. That's great. We can still authenticate with a hash using an attack vector called pass the hash, but more often than not, that's normally using NTLM v1 hash, not the v2. So having credentials is much better because it allows you to use services that do not allow for you to pass the hash as well. So we have now the password for the SQL SOC user. On SQL as well. Now that we have a plain text user and password set, the first thing that we need to know is where we're allowed to use these credentials for. So one of the go-to things to test for is if you can access WinRM, for example, because this allows you to get a shell even as a local user, unlike, for example, using a PSExec or WMI, which sometimes only allow you to get a shell if you're an admin user and you've got write privileges on SMB shares. So let's see. Let's see if we can get away with not specifying the computer name SQL here on the user. If we need to specify it, that's okay. We can go back. But right now, we're just going to use netexec to test if these credentials are valid on the network. Yeah, which they are actually. And it even tells us that this user might actually be a local administrator, which I'm not sure if that's true or not, but again, sometimes this can give false positives too. So we know that we can likely access this over WinRM and gain a shell, but let's also test for WMI, for example, just to see. Okay, so it does allow. And let's test. I do want to test first if we can access this using PSExec or WMIexec as well, because that's going to give us a better shell on the machine. But if that doesn't work, we can also go directly to evil WinRM as well. Yeah, so we cannot do that actually. And I think if I were to test WMI as well, it probably wouldn't work either. But let's test, why not? Yeah, so that actually didn't work, and this was likely a false positive. Unless if I go here and type the machine as well, maybe that'll let us authenticate. Yeah, so it still doesn't allow us. That's okay. Let's test for evil WinRM because that always works. Oh no. Nice, we're able to get a shell over evil WinRM. So let's always do our first checks. And we can see here we are the SQL SVC user on the domain controller. And here's the IP address too, just to verify that as well. So now if we go to the desktop of this user, we can see that the local flag is likely there. Oh no. Okay, so the local flag is actually not located here. Maybe if we go to the users, we'll find that there's more users on this machine. Let's see. Yeah, so that is true. We have user Ryan.Cooper here as well. So now that we have credentials, the next thing that we're going to be wanting to do is running our privilege escalation. Okay, so one of the things that we're going to be wanting to do is running WinPeas on the machine. So if we go back to our user's home directory and cd to desktop, for example, just to see so that we have somewhere to work in, let's close this and let's transfer over linpeas to the machine, or winpeas rather. All right, we've got it here. Let's start a web server. Or actually, we don't even need to do this because we've got our shell over evilwinrm, so we can easily transfer files to the machine like this. So if we just use the upload function here and do a bunch of .. slashes, because it's going to start searching in our local directory where we started the session in. And perfect, we can see that it's already starting to upload. This might take a while depending on the connection that you have on the machine and the stability of the network, but let's just let it finish. All right, perfect. Now that the file was uploaded successfully, let's just execute it. Again, my preference for this is to run it, pipe the output into a txt file, and then transfer that txt file back to my Kali machine so that we don't have to run it over and over again on the Windows machine. And also we might have some issues with visibility in the file when we're running it. For example, the lack of colors, which might help us to identify the highest probability privilege escalation vectors as well. So let's transfer it back to Kali. We can name the txt file win.txt, and then we're also going to be wanting to pipe or suppress errors in the output so that they do not clog up our terminal. This can also take a while to run, so we'll just need to wait for it to finish. All right, now that WinPeas is finished, let's also use the download functionality to download the file to our working directory in Kali. So let's go back to our box. It was escape. Let's copy this, go back into our evilwinrm shell and name it appropriately. And let's go win.txt, and then where we want to copy it to, which is going to be here. Again, I'm going to add a bunch of .. slashes here so that I can guarantee that it's not going to be in the wrong directory. That should be enough. Oh, I know the issue here. It's because we need to specify not just the directory, but the file name too, I guess. So let's go here. Okay, now it's working. Very quick. So let's go here and verify this. Yeah, we can see that we have win.txt here, so that's great. Let's cut it out and start from the top. So we got some general information about the machine here, but nothing that we don't already know, honestly. It's domain controller. Sometimes there can be some good information here, but that's not the case now. No antivirus is great. It did not find any PowerShell history file. That's also a great place to check for credentials. you should likely be checking the PowerShell history file for all the users on the machine that you find, not just the first user that you land on. Yeah, we already knew this. Nothing too interesting here. All right, so this is interesting. We have a bunch of possible users on the machine, so let's just take a note of this. Make a little list of them here, and then later on we can actually make a txt file and just put them all in there just in case we want to be brute forcing or spraying credentials around on all the users on the Active Directory. All right, great. Some auto logon credentials were found. This is interesting, but I think that we're not actually going to be able to access these until after we own the computer. Then we might be able to read them. And nothing too interesting here as well. Some path folders. These can be very interesting if we're able to write to these directories, but likely we might be able to write to these ones, but not to these. Path hijacking is a very valid vector, and sometimes it can be hard to spot too. Okay, unquoted path and space detected, but I don't think that we're able to write here yet, obviously. Path injection, it's not very useful to us. This is also interesting, but this is always gonna pop up. Again, the determining factor, it's going to be if we actually have permissions to write to this directory, which I don't believe we do. Windows tasks is a great place to put your payloads and transfer files and things into, because this is always a public directory that you can write in. So if you need somewhere to work, then here you go. Nothing too interesting here. Here we can potentially identify some internal services that might be running, but I believe that we already saw all of these on the outside, or at least most of them on the outside. So if we found something here, we might be able to potentially pour forward the using Ligolo and access the local loopback address range on the machine and pivot into services that you're only able to access through the machine itself. And we actually don't need elevated privileges on the machine in order to do that. We can just do that as a local user. As long as we have elevated privileges on the Ligolo proxy user that we're running as, which is going to be on our Kali machine anyways, and that's not a problem. Okay. Nothing too interesting here. Some domain information here. Yeah, this is just our WinPeas file. So basically we did not find anything in the output of WinPeas. So what's the next step when you don't find anything in the output of WinPeas, which actually happens all the time? We're going to want to focus on enumerating local files on the system. Sometimes when you find these, let me identify it here. When you find these unquoted service paths, sometimes these are worth checking, but I know for sure the ones on this machine are either standard Windows paths that we're not going to be able to edit as our user, or it's related to the virtual machine that's running the box. So we're not going to want to mess with that either. And likely we don't actually have the permissions to as well. So let's move on to enumerating some local files here. So we already know that there's nothing on the desktop or the documents folder of this user, but let's double check. There's nothing here. Okay, so let's check what users are on the machine. Okay, so we got Ryan Cooper, which matches one of the users here. That could be useful later on. Can we access his directory? I don't think so, but let's try. Yeah, we do not have permissions to. Unauthorized access exception. Okay, no problem. Let's go straight to the root directory and see if we can find anything. So the only thing here that's non-standard that we know it's been added or configured into the machine is the SQL server, and we are the SQL service user, so we should also be checking our privileges, which are very limited. We do not have a lot of privileges. We can't even remote shut down the machine. So again, it's just confirming for us that we're going to have to enumerate files on the system and likely identify some credentials possibly. So let's do that. Let's go into the SQL server directory here. So we've got these executable files. We could transfer these back to our Kali machine and use some tools like exif tool or just strings to see if we can identify any credentials inside of these files, but that seems like a stretch, and I'd probably leave that for some later enumeration, actually. I would not start off with executable file enumeration, because likely the solution is going to be something more simple than that. But let's go into the logs directory, because that's the most likely place to find some credentials here. All right, let's transfer this log back to our Kali machine instead of clogging up our terminal here. So let's download it. And then we need to specify the directory. Also, an indicator that this is something interesting is the fact that it's not a .log file, but rather a .back. So this is actually a backup of a log, which is curious, because why would you back up a log if there's nothing interesting inside of it? So since we know there's nothing interesting in WinPs, let's just close that out and cat out this file here. This is a ton of text, but we can try to skim through it pretty quickly. So immediately I started reading and I see this, which is interesting. And luckily it's all the way at the bottom of the file, so we didn't even have to read the whole thing. So we can see that there is a failed login for the user Ryan Cooper, which we know matches this user from the domain, but not only this user, but he also already has a previous logon onto the machine. And the password did not match. Okay, no problem. But then here we can see that they attempted another login, but with the wrong user. So that's interesting. So I think this is perhaps a typo, and they put their password in their username, which made it so that now the password is recorded in the log. So I believe we now have credentials for Ryan Cooper, but let's test it. Let's use an XC again to test this, netexec. WinRM. And the user is Brian.Cooper. And that's probably IP. All right, so we have a positive here. Again, this says pwned here, which is an indicator that the user is likely a local administrator, but I don't know if I would trust that too much, actually, but let's switch to this user using evil WinRM. Or we can try to see if we can use Impacket's PS exec. All right, so this is kind of a good way to test too if the user is a local admin user, because even though it said here pwned, again, I can confirm that that's a false positive, because if it was an admin user, then they would have had permissions to write to the SMB shares. So that's okay. Let's just use evil WinRM. So nice. We're able to authenticate easily as Ryan Cooper here. So let's see. Also, whenever I have some service that I'm able to authenticate as some user with a user password combo, I'll just always copy paste this into my notes just in case I need to switch around different shells or access different services. Maybe I'll use evil WinRM to transfer files, but then Impacket PS exec when I have an admin shell is more useful because you can run Mimikatz inside of it and it's more interactive as well. So let's just run our basic checks here. We are on the same machine, of course. The IP address matches, and let's check our privileges. So we're also very limited here, actually, as to which permissions we have. I do wonder what we have access to, though. So let's check what files are in our home directory. Here, we're probably going to find the user flag, which is great. Yeah, I don't need to cut this out because I've already done this submission, of course, but if you're looking for it, there it is. And now we need to, again, keep working on escalating our privileges to NT authority system. So let's see what we can do here. One thing that we can do, for example, on here, now that we have a set of credentials, is we can run a Bloodhound scan using NXC as well. So let's see, not SMB, but LDAP. Let's just copy paste the credentials here. This way of running Bloodhound is fantastic, or rather Sharphound, because we don't need to transfer anything to the machine, and we're not going to run into Kerberos double hop issues, which is going to prevent you from running Bloodhound using many other methods. Also, we can just do it on the whole network at once here instead of having to transfer the executable, like the Sharphound executable machine by machine. You can just run it on the whole IP range as well. So this is just one machine, so that's actually not an issue, but I'll try to do it anyways here just to show you guys. So here it's testing against all the machines. We already know that there's only one anyways, which is we're straight on the domain controller. So thankfully we don't need to do any pivoting into internal networks or anything crazy like that. We already had a shell on the domain controller from the beginning as the SQL user. So here it says that we did not find the domain controller. Let's see how we can specify the DNS server over NXC. So let's see. All right, so if we go here, --DNS server, we're able to connect back to the domain. So let's close our scan here. And then we're going to put on actually the same IP address of the computer, which is the domain controller. Now we should not have any more issues with that. All right, perfect. Now it's successful. So this is our Bloodhound scanned here, and it's gonna put it in this directory. I'm just gonna copy this, go to another shell, and I'm gonna go move this dot slash. But I'll wait for it to finish first before I do that. All right, now that the Bloodhound scan is finished, let's go here and copy it over. Great. We do not need to unzip this file. We simply need to open Bloodhound and drag it back in there. Sudo Bloodhound, and this is going to open it up in our browser. Perfect. All right, so now we've got Bloodhound opened up. Let's go in. I also always like to go in here and clear everything before every session, just in case I forgot to do that on my previous box. What is it? Please delete all my data. Is that correct? What is it now? Please delete my data. And confirm. Great, deletion is underway. Upload file, and let's go here where our file is. Let's just drag and drop it over. Then hit upload twice. This is going to say ingesting. We're going to want to wait until this says complete before we touch anything here, because if we mess around too much, the download or the file ingest is going to fail, and we don't want that. Oh, canceled. Oh no. Let's try that again. All right, now that the file ingest is complete, let's go into our Explore tab and let's start specifying what users we own already. So we own the SQL service user, add to own, and we have Ryan Cooper as well. Let's see, Ryan Cooper. Add to owned. So let's test if we are able to find a path, for example, to domain administrator. But first, let's actually identify all the domain administrators. So, okay, administrator at SQL.hackthebox is part of the group. So let's see if we can go from Ryan Cooper to the administrator account, for example. Okay, path not found. That's all right. Let's see what we can do here. Let's go into our queries and start running some. These would be great checks, for example, if we've got several machines inside of a network and we have already several sets of credentials that we can move around with. But for us, that we only have one machine on this box, it's redundant to do these checks. This would also be great because if we've already owned a machine, we can dump the domain admin credentials if they have been logged on to the machine before using tools called, for example, Mimikatz. Kerberos users, this is very interesting, but unfortunately we do not get any matches. AS rep roasting is also a great check to do, but normally these are great for identifying the first set of credentials in the network, but in this case we can't do it anyways. So let's see, from owned objects, where can we get? Nowhere interesting, unfortunately. Shortest path to domain admins, but likely this is not going to be starting from our user, unfortunately. Yeah, so it's not. So let's see what else we can do. Let's check certificates, for example. Another tool that we can use to check for the certificates instead of relying completely on Bloodhound is Certify. Let's see what we can do. Since we have the credentials of the user Ryan, we can just use these. And let's see. And let's get the IP of the domain controller here. So I wanted to check this using Bloodhound, for example. But for example, here, I wanted to check the UPN, but unfortunately, it's not showing us anything here. So again, we have other tools at our disposal, so that's not an issue. Let's just check it with Certify AD to see if we can find anything related to the administrator account here. All right, fantastic. So this actually did work. Successfully requested certificate and got certificate with UPN administrator. So now we've got the certificate and private key to the administrator account. Let's see if we can get their NTLM hash using this. So we're going to be using Certify as well to do this again. Off this time PFX because we have the PFX key. Specify the file, then the domain is going to be SQL.hackthebox. And we need to specify the domain controller IP so that it resolves correctly. We're requesting the TGT for it. Oh no, clock skew too great. Okay, so how can we fix this? How can we fix this? Let's see. All right, so it's telling us here that we need to use these commands here. Let's see. Sudo, and let's go here. I did exactly the same thing again. IP of targets. Let's specify this. I'll install it, no problem. Operation not permitted. Maybe let's run with sudo. Perfect. Okay. Now that we've got the date set correctly, let's see if it's going to work now. Or do we need to actually set the time here too? Let's see if it'll work. Okay, it did work this time. Nice. So now we've got the hash for the administrator user. Let's authenticate using impacket psexec here. So since we're going to be using the hash to authenticate, we do not need to include the password here. We just need to include the username. And here we can just make sure and remember to put the IP address as well. And specify the hash too. I think that, let's see, is it this portion that we need to use? Oh no. Okay, so that was just the wrong syntax. And we need to use the whole hash actually, as a matter of fact. So let's just copy it and paste the whole thing. Hashes. Delete this. Put in the whole hash here. And we should get a shell. Yippee! So who am I? NT-authority system on the domain controller. Fantastic. So now that we are the admin user, we can simply go and cd to their directory. And go to the desktop, and then there we're going to find the proof.txt flag. Or root.txt rather. And that's it. Fantastic. So this is just a good methodology that if you don't find anything on WinKeys, it does not mean that your tools are failing or that you need to give up. Again, you always want to check everything at your disposal. For example, if there's nothing too interesting on WinPeas, then maybe you should check Bloodhound, for example, if you know that you're in a sort of Active Directory environment. This is like a pseudo Active Directory environment because we're directly on the domain controller, but it's still good to get a picture of the network and see what other users are there or identify any other common misconfigurations. And again, if you don't find anything in Bloodhound either, then the last check that I would do is to use certify AD. Besides that, we might have also tried to do credential spraying for all the users on the domain with the credentials that we had so far, as well as possibly credential spraying, testing for certificates, testing using Bloodhound to see if we have any weak configurations that are going to allow us to escalate our privileges, as well as maybe testing for running WinPeas as the user Ryan.Cooper, because potentially that user might have had more privileges than the SQL SVC user. But in practice, it's more common than not that the service users actually have more privileges. But in this case, it was locked down, so we needed to pursue another vector of escalating our privileges. And I could have confidently said that since the service account did not have more elevated privileges than the user, then the user also likely it's going to be locked down. But again, you should always be checking for all of these different things and not blindly relying on your tools or giving up after you've done anything that you know how to do. Always just keep going with your enumeration until you find something. And again, this is an example of more of a deeper attack vector because more often than not, you're not going to be exploiting the Active Directory certification services. But it's always possible that it might be vulnerable, so it's always worth checking for sure. All right, thank you so much. If you like the video, leave a like, please. And if you have any suggestions or would like to see anything else, then just leave a comment and I'll get back to you for sure. Peace.